What's up, guys? It's Daniel from Mute the Pianos, and today I'm going to be reviewing the new Youth Service album, Out of Focus. Youth Service are an up-and-coming rap group who I hadn't really heard about before I started hearing about this album. I think it was a friend of mine who shouted them out, and honestly, I was kind of interested. They seem to have a similar aesthetic to a group like Brockhampton, where they had kind of come from all around the world to record together, just shared by a collective interest in rap. And this idea is kind of new and kind of becoming more and more of a possibility in our age as it's easier to work together remotely on music and to meet online and to discover people who might be better suited for whatever kind of music that you're trying to make. We don't have to just be limited to making a band with whoever you go to high school with. And it's really exciting to see youth service being a part of this new movement. However, when I brought up Brockhampton, I didn't just do it because they follow in their footsteps by making their band from people all around the world. I also do it because I think they follow in their footsteps a lot in terms of sound. I definitely hear influence from Brockhampton as well as Injury Reserve and Odd Future a lot in this group. And while I do think that they definitely borrow from their influences pretty heavy to the point where it's impossible to hear one of the songs on here and not think, oh, this could have landed on an Injury Reserve album and no one would have really batted an eye. But I honestly don't think that that's too bad of a thing, because there is taking pretty heavily from your influences, and there's also turning that influence into something really interesting, something exciting. And I think that Youth Service really do pull that off for the most part on this album. We hear that kind of influence straight from the first track, Holdup, which totally reminds me of how Brockhampton started Saturation 1 with Heat. Now, I'm not just going to compare every track to whatever their influences have done, but I do think that that was still an interesting comparison, just given how similar the songs sound and energy. And however, I think that this song is even more abrasive than Heat was. It is a fantastic, ugly, and strong opener to the album, where they're just yelling about how it's a motherfucking hold-up, and it really does a lot to bring energy to the beginning of the album. But then right after Hold Up, we get total change in pace, which honestly didn't really surprise me too much with It's Alright. And while I do think that the singing right at the beginning of the song is a little bit shaky, I think once the hook comes in, then it gets a bit better and turns out to be a really great song. I especially really love verse 3, where Cole is talking about his struggles with weight loss. I think it's a super potent, one of the best verses on the album, and a great testament to being able to move past things that are hard for you, things that you might be struggling with. And that kind of brings me to the second thing that I wanted to talk about with this album. Usually when we're talking about albums that are this low budget, where they barely have much of an audience, they don't have presumably that much money to really be spending on this album, you can expect some kind of amateurish sound. And honestly, I think where we're seeing amateur the least is in the production. The production on this album is really, really great. From front to back, it feels like every beat has a much higher budget than it actually does. But these beats definitely do hold their own. They don't sound like something put together in GarageBand in a few minutes just for somebody to rap over. They sound legitimately professional, and some of these beats on the album really blew me away. Like on Death Row, where we get these minimalist piano chords that are just really, really great, especially when contrasted with the singing on this song, which is pitch shifted. And sometimes that doesn't work at all. It's a very dangerous thing to pitch shift vocals on an album, because I've heard so many cases from, some of the biggest rappers where they pitch shift something and it just annoys me so much to the point where I can't listen to a song, but it works perfectly on this song. Death Row is probably my favorite on the entire album because of how much it works. And lyrically, on this song, they're talking about the low point that people don't talk about, the fall after you reach the top. Saying, like, nobody tell you about the death row, nobody tell you about those low things. And I could just be speculating about this because I find that a lot of their songs on this album are super open to interpretation, which I do think could be perceived as a good or bad thing. Sometimes it seems like they're doing a good job at keeping their meaning cryptic, so you really have to dig in to see what they mean. But I also do think that sometimes they can have trouble staying on topic. That some verses seem a little bit more within the theme of the song than others, and I'm a little bit confused sometimes as to what a particular verse has to do with the overall message of the song that they're rapping on. However, when I was talking about production, I said that it didn't seem amateur to me at all. And I really do think that. But what I do think is a little bit amateur on this album are the flows. Sometimes the rappers on this album have flows that can be really nice, but a lot of the time I find that it's a little hard for me to get into a really solid rhythm with what they're saying and how they're saying it. Sometimes a small part of a verse will be really nicely executed, but then later it'll feel a little bit sloppy. And I think that that inconsistency is something natural for the beginning of a group and something that, you kind of learn to work on more and more as you progress in rapping. But I do think that with this album, that's probably the biggest thing that struck me as amateur, those flows. But I do think that everything else on the album, especially production, is so well done for how low of a budget they have that it all works out. For example, Liam's Interlude, which comes right after It's Alright, is a really, really fantastic interlude. It's a little bit strange that we're getting it so early on the album, but it honestly works really well for me, especially given that the instrumental is so beautiful and airy. It's great. And reading into the lyrics, I actually saw a thing that Liam was saying he wrote this while like lying on his back, like looking up at the trees, which I feel like the instrumental complements perfectly. It really does feel like you're with him as he's saying all these things to himself. It's a bit of a stream of consciousness, just whatever he's thinking, he's putting down idea. And it obviously is a little bit rough around the edges and could strike you as a bit cliche, but I think that just how offhanded and off the cuff this feels works really well for them, especially this just being an interlude. And then we get I'll Be Fine, which to me feels slightly redundant in message from It's Alright. However, I do really like this song. Some of the I'll Be Fine vocals I have mixed feelings about, but overall I think that this song is really fantastic. It's another nice moody cut, and towards the end of the song, there's a movie metaphor. And at the end of the song, Liam starts talking about like life being like a movie, using this movie kind of metaphor. It's really beautiful, and I think that he develops it super well, talking about how you only know the start of the movie and you're still like hanging out with the stars and your budget's low. And it really is fascinating to see them use this movie metaphor, especially since this is not the only time on the album that it's done. We get the movie metaphors again from Ali on the title track, Out of Focus, which I think is a really interesting tie-in on this album. And honestly, I kind of wish that I had seen more of it because I think that those were some of the most interesting lyrical points on the album. And that kind of metaphor just works really well for what they're trying to say. And I would be interested to hear if it was intentional for them both to use those kind of similar metaphors twice. And these uses of extended metaphors make me think that they really could do something if they were doing a bit more showing and not telling with their lyrics, that they could make some kind of conceptual piece. And hopefully they could do that on their next album, making something a bit more conceptual and focused. Anyways, Out of Focus, the title track, I think is also a really great track. I do really like the hook, especially when Julian's bridge kind of intertwines with it later on the song. And the kind of somber guitar works really well on this song too. And it being about a breakup, it could be a bit cliche, but I think that they pull it off really well. And they have kind of the lyrical maturity to at least take it a step above being boring and cliche. But if you're looking for more of a banger, then there's the track Bodies, which is the lead single for this album. And honestly, for some reason, it reminds me a lot of King's Dead, the Kendrick Lamar and Future song, especially Future's verse, just in the flow and how it's delivered. I could be wrong, but that's just the kind of vibe that I get from this song. I really like this song a lot. I really love the more upbeat and banger energy that it provides, especially the part where Cole is rapping on verse 2 and then he actually like runs out of breath and he's like, I ran out of fucking breath. It's really good and really just shows how they're kind of bringing their amateurness to the front and just being like, yeah, this is just us and how we do stuff. I really like it in it. And then there's Facelift and Resurrect, which I think might be the two kind of lowest points on the album, especially Facelift. I don't think that Facelift is a bad song by any means. I just find it to be a little bit uneventful and kind of unnecessary on the album. It didn't really hold my interest that much. I still don't think it's a bad song at all, though. Again, just probably the least interesting song on the album for me. And Resurrect, the hook is just so for me. And I'm not sure exactly what they're talking about on this song. I think it might be about like their haters and just completely shitting on them. After that though, we have I.M.Y.B.I.M.T.O.M.M, which stands for I miss you, but I miss the old me more. And this song is absolutely fantastic. Easily one of the best on this album. It feels super nostalgic, kind of talking about them being younger and their roots and their hometown. But as the song goes on, once you get to Cole's verse, you kind of see the flip side of that and the violence he's seen in his time when he was younger and how that's kind of desensitized him and how terrible it is. And it honestly really works well for the times we're in right now. But he did say that he wasn't really intending this to be about the current movement. It was just about what he's seen as a kid and how that's changed him as a person. It's really great. It's a super fantastic, sort of nostalgic track, sort of looking at how beautiful our youth was, but also the fucked up things that's happened that we haven't really looked at maybe completely or we couldn't really understand completely at the time. I think lyrically it might be the best point on the entire album. Kind of another flip side of that on Culdesac, where they're talking about how they don't know where they're going in life, but they're never going to go back to their hometown. They're never going to go back to their home. That they're trying to move on from where they've grown up. And I think it's interesting to have that as the flip side to I Miss You. And it works pretty well, especially Domingo's second verse, where he kind of talks about growing in a white suburban neighborhood and how that's kind of affected him and how the people have been close-minded around him. I think the hook might repeat maybe one too many times, but I still do really like it, and I think it's a great song overall. And then we have the two closing tracks, the first one being Carry My Name, which is a really short kind of other interlude song with just a hook and one verse. However, my one gripe with this song is that I'm not really the biggest fan of the hook. I didn't really love the vocals. And it's just kind of more of an interlude leading into the final song, Keep It For Me. Keep It For Me, I would say, is a really good send-off for the album. It talks one last time about all those themes of heartbreak and stuff that they've been exploring throughout the album. And I think that they do a really good job of closing this album off by talking about those things. Even if those themes can be a little bit played out, it's okay with me. It works really well. And I really like the Take Your Time outro too. Just a great finisher to the album. So Overall, this was a really great album. I think that Youth Service are already on that path of becoming the next big rap group. I truly do think that they have the talent to do it. They have great production, interesting lyrics, and while, maybe their flows and deliveries are a little bit amateurish, I think that there's easily a lot of room for them to improve and become super professional while still maintaining this great style that they have going. And I think that once they step into their own a bit more and stop taking a bit from some of the other groups that they're inspired by, I think that they have the potential to create some legitimate masterpieces. However, I think that this album on its own is great. I've been listening to it a lot over the past few months, and I've just absolutely loved it. Some really great, fun songs with great production, and yeah, I'm really interested to see where they go next. That hopefully they get a bit more of an audience and they're able to do more, have more ambition for their next album, maybe. But man, great album. One of my favorite rap albums of the year. I'm feeling maybe an 8.1, an 8.2 on this album. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this album, what you think about Youth Service, if you liked it or didn't. But besides that, let me know what you would like me to review next. But yeah, have a great rest of your day, everyone.